every UFC fighter's top 3 most iconic performances. That's right, we're not going to be talking about the best performances. We are going to be talking about the most legendary, icon-making performances for our favorite UFC fighters. And let's just get into this, starting with Alexander the Great Volkanovski. That's right. The most iconic performance for Volk is his Ortega fight. That is right. There's a lot of iconic Volk performances, but I believe the Ortega fight is the most Volkanovski-esque fight in his career. It really encapsulates who he is as a fighter. Remember, going into this fight, the world was sort of against Volk after the Holloway rematch, where a lot of people were saying he was a fake champion because they thought he got a robbery win. People were underestimating him. People were saying he's not even that good. Holloway's so much better. And Volk goes into this fight and dominates the majority of the fight, but then gets put in a mounted guillotine where we are sure he's going to tap, and he fights out of it, proving to be one of the toughest, grittiest fighters in the UFC, having an ultimate grit moment. And then he beats up Ortega, and the commentators and everyone at home is like, bro, what is this guy made of? You know, he starts teeing off on Ortega on the ground, and the commentators are like, who is this guy? He schools him on the feet. He 10-8s him on the ground. There's a moment where everyone thinks, oh my God, he's going to tap. He's not even human. How did he not tap? And then after this fight, it was like, whoa, this guy actually is super entertaining. He has an amazing fight style. He's super tough, you know, and he became Volk. This was the Volk defining performance. And this fight made Volkanovski my favorite fighter. The second one, Holloway trilogy. Again, a lot of people are going to say that that should be the first one, but I just think the Ortega fight was Volkanovski's real legendary moment. I think that was like him becoming a legend. Going into the Holloway trilogy, there was already like a lot of respect for Volkanovski, especially after the TKZ fight as well. But the Holloway trilogy, schooling Max Holloway, becoming the pound-for-pound #1 fighter on the planet, outstriking him, outvoluming him, obviously that's 1 or 2. You can't put it any lower. Number 3, even though he lost the fight to Makhachev, he put up such a great performance. He had such a good fight, and he exceeded people's expectations so much that even though he didn't get his hand raised, everyone was talking about how insanely impressive Volkanovski was. Everyone was talking about how it's insane that Volk didn't get submitted, didn't get dominated. And Makhachev, you know, I think he did 4-1 Volk. I think he took 4 rounds, but still, I think that's an iconic moment despite him losing. I think you can have an iconic fight even if you lose. And the Makhachev first fight was one of the greatest, highest level fights we've ever seen. And then an honorable mention would be the Yair Rodriguez fight where he TKOs Yair Rodriguez. And this was right after the Makhachev fight, the first one. And everyone's like, dude, this guy still might be the best fighter in the world. Okay, so Volkanovski, these are his most iconic performances. Let's get on to Petr Yan, another fighter that doesn't have a shortage of iconic moments. In my opinion, his most iconic performance ever, though, is the Jose Aldo performance. The Jose Aldo fight, I think this is one of the most rewatchable fights of all time. This may be my favorite fight to rewatch of all time. And watching this live, I was unbelievably impressed. Like, I remember like my reaction as I'm watching these guys exchange in the pocket and thinking, holy shit, this is like the highest level striking I've ever seen. And not only were these guys in the pocket the entire first 3.5 rounds up until the end of the fight, the commentators were talking about how like these guys are basically stepping on each other's feet the whole time because of how close quarters they're fighting in, like how they're literally in a phone booth and they're just going combo for combo with perfect technique. The fluidity of these guys' striking, unbelievable. And of course, like a lot of Yan fights, and he's famous for doing this, he builds and it turns into an avalanche where Yan starts to break Aldo. Aldo's in there, he's making it competitive, and Yan just starts breaking him. At the end of the 3rd round, the 4th round, he hurts him badly. And the 5th round, he hurts him again. And he's just beating the crap out of Aldo on the ground. Late stoppage, one of the latest stoppages I've ever seen, by the way. There's like a 3-minute moment where Aldo's there defenseless, just taking unanswered strike after unanswered strike. Very late stoppage, but In typical Yan fashion, it's competitive, it's super high level early, but like he just starts breaking his opponents and they can't last. And he really looked like a Terminator in this. High output, high volume, insanely impressive techniques. The highest level body shot boxing I've ever seen in MMA is in this fight as well. Number 2, the Sandhagen fight. I think a lot of people would have that as his most iconic performance. Another insanely impressive performance where both guys are throwing high level strikes. It's a very high output chess match, but it's a war as well. You have that moment where Yan lands a spinning back fist into a hook and he drops Sandhagen and he's landing like spinning wheel kicks in the end of the fight. It's such an amazing performance. The Aljo 1 fight, also a classic Yan-like fight where Aljo goes out there, he's looking good early, he's throwing high output, but Yan, low output Yan, patient Yan, drops him in the first round. That's all that he does in the first. Second round, Aljo is still throwing tons of output, but Yan is like slowly but surely outdoing him every once in a while by catching a kick and sweeping him all over himself, hitting him with a Osotogari trip. And he just starts styling on Aljo in the grappling, ragdolling him, taking him down with super impressive techniques. And then as it goes on, he just starts breaking Aljo, and Aljo's body language looks like it's on a nosedive. Yan is getting more confident, and it's looking like Yan is just going to find a finish. Of course, the illegal knee, heard around the world. Very unfortunate for Petr Yan, but I still count this as a legendary, iconic performance because of how impressive Yan's takedown defense was and how impressive his takedowns were. He took down Aljo like 10 times in this fight. And again, it was like the classic Petr Yan, low output, cyborg kind of performance. And then an honorable mention, there's a couple of them, the O'Malley fight and the Figueiredo fight. Figueiredo fight was really impressive. The O'Malley fight, close fight, war, but still iconic performance. But those are my top 3 Yan iconic performances. Let's get to Khamzat Chimaev. I think it's Li Jingliang. I think Li Jingliang is Khamzat Chimaev's most epic performance ever, okay? I don't think a fighter has had more aura than Khamzat Chimaev on the night of beating Li Jingliang. Like, nobody has ever been this impressive. This could be the best performance in MMA history. The most scary, terrifying. How on earth is anyone ever going to beat this guy? After Khamzat did this to Li Jingliang, I was convinced nobody would ever be able to give him a tough fight, period. This was right before the Burns fight, by the way. So he ended up having a war. That's my number 2 pick. And some people are going to say, what do you mean it's the Burns fight? No, because this is the Khamzat Chimaev-esque fight to a T. He goes out there, runs across the octagon, picks up Li Jingliang, and carries him over to Dana White, drops him on the canvas, jumps on him, overwhelms him. He fought like a hitman in this fight and then chokes Li Jingliang out. One of the most dominant showcases of grappling you will ever see. Just an absolute mauling. And after watching this, I was convinced, and he kind of did it to Usman in the first round anyway, but I was convinced like every single person he fights from here on out is getting done like this. Nobody is going to be able to stop this. And in a way, it's still kind of true. Like, he's still unbeatable. At least, well, he's looked beatable in moments, but he's still not been beaten. But the level of aura Khamzat had after this was insane, man. Insane. Number 2, the Gilbert Burns fight, war. One of the best fights ever. Number 3, the Whitaker fight, which was similar to this, maybe not as insane because he didn't pick Whitaker up and carry him to the other side of the octagon. He did sub him easily, I will say that. But it was more of a scramble. There was some more difficulty. It was still a first round submission, but like it just can't compare to the level of domination that he did to Li Jingliang. Still though, higher level opponent, Robert Whitaker, great takedown defense. Like, that's still up there. But again, I just think that the Li Jingliang fight was the most insane thing I've ever seen from Khamzat Chimaev. And the GM3 fight, there's something about the GM3 fight. He just goes out there, knocks out Gerald Meerschaert. Another instance in which we're thinking, bro, who is going to stop this guy? Who is going to stop this guy? He KOs Meerschaert. We're like, bro, he has KO power too? You know, that was insane as well. That was insane. Max Holloway. There are so many options, but I think the Calvin Kattar fight is the clear winner, all right? Most significant strikes landed in UFC history from the Significant Strike King. And this was a fight where I was actually concerned for Calvin Kattar watching it live. This was one of the few fights that made me uncomfortable to watch as it went on, because I was thinking, this guy's taking too much damage. It could be dangerous. Like, he may never be able to come back from this. Thankfully, Kattar, there was nothing ultimately wrong with him at the end of the fight, but he still took a fuckload of damage. But this was so violent and so dominant, I was very concerned while watching it live. That being said, like, still though, Max Holloway landing 150 significant strikes in like multiple rounds is insane, dude. Insane. The first round, he landed like 80 significant strikes. I don't know the real strike numbers off the top of my head, but this was just unbelievable. Of course, the 5th round, he's saying, I'm the best boxer in the UFC. And this was right after he lost the rematch to Volk, where it was clear he's going to have to win a couple more in order to get that back. And after this fight, this was before the Volk and Ortega fight, everyone was saying, bro, Holloway is still someone with a claim to be the best 145er on the planet. So this is up there. The Gaethje fight, of course. UFC 300 knocks out Justin Gaethje with a buzzer beater KO after schooling him. That's obviously up there. The Ortega fight, I think the Ortega fight's a little bit more iconic than the Aldo fights. I have the Aldo fights, both of them, because they were very similar performances, as honorable mentions. But I think the Ortega fight was like the original Calvin Kattar fight. He was at a lower level. His defense wasn't as impressive. His technique wasn't as amazing as it was in the Kattar fight. But that was the pre-Calvin Kattar type of fight, where it was so dominant. That was the original record for the most significant strikes ever landed. Holloway broke that record against Ortega and then re-broke it. Alex Pereira, I think it's got to be the Jamal Hill fight. There's so many to choose from Alex Pereira, because it's like every other fight this guy has is one of his most legendary performances. Even the Strickland fight, it's not on here as an honorable mention, but even that is like an iconic Alex Pereira KO. But the reason I say it's the Jamal Hill fight is because this was his first like real left hook KO, where it's just one punch and the guy goes falling backwards, since the Sean Strickland fight. Like, of course, he had a couple of TKOs in between the Strickland fight and this one. Like, he knocked out Jiri Prochazka, but there were some follow-up shots. This was like a clean left hook KO, couple of follow-up shots, but like a flying someone across the octagon kind of left hook from Alex Pereira. UFC 300, massive event. This is really where Pereira broke out as maybe being the biggest star in the sport. So I think this was his most iconic performance. Number 2, it's the Adesanya fight, the first one. It's a close fight, but he's losing 3-1 going into the 5th round. He needs a finish, and he just goes after Adesanya from pillar to post and TKOs him up against the fence, becoming a champion, fulfilling the prophecy, 3-0 to Adesanya, which is insane. So to see it actually be realized after the legendary story that both of these guys have in kickboxing, and then, Adesanya becomes a champion, and then Pereira's chasing him, to see him realize it, that's number 2. Could be number 1, but I think the Jamal Hill KO was a little bit of a cleaner KO. The Ankalaev rematch, that's also going to be my number 3, just because he was being counted out. A lot of people, including myself, thought that maybe this is the end of Pereira, maybe he's declining, and then he goes out there and finishes Ankalaev in 1 minute, which was insane. And then the Roundtree fight, the Prochazka fight. The Roundtree fight could be higher, though. It could be number 3, could be even number 2, because that's where Pereira went into the Matrix, right? He had like a lot of highlight reel moments in the 4th round of that Roundtree fight. The Prochazka rematch was also a sick performance from Pereira. Even though that was a really sick performance, I just think some of the others overshadow it. But speaking of the guy that lost to Alex Pereira and the guy that also beat him, Adesanya, he's had some insanely iconic performances. So many that it's actually kind of hard to rank as well, because you think about some of the iconic moments from his career. You think the Anderson Silva moment, even the walkout that he had against Whitaker in the first fight and then knocking him out. Those aren't even in my top 3. Those are honorable mentions for me. The most iconic moment, it's got to be the Pereira KO. After it seemed like Pereira was this guy's eternal boogeyman, he's never going to be able to beat him. Pereira just has his number. He goes out there and viciously KOs him. When it looks like Pereira is starting to really take over the fight as well, He has this playing possum moment up against the fence, and he KOs Alex Pereira out cold, does the celebration dance with the bow and arrows. I mean, this has to be his number one most iconic performance. The number two, I think it's the Paulo Costa fight. There was a beef going into that fight as well. A lot of people saw what Costa did to Yoel Romero, just walking him down with no respect. And a lot of us were thinking that if he can walk down a guy as dangerous as Yoel the way that he did, what is Adesanya going to do to stop him, right? Especially this was after Adesanya fought Yoel, where it was a stinker. And Adesanya just goes out there and has an absolute masterclass. And of course, you had moments like the Brunson fight. I forgot about the Brunson fight as well. The Brunson fight is something that should be on here as well. Let me add that. But Adesanya against Costa was in the Matrix. You know what I mean? Like, that was a real Matrix style bender performance. Number three, even though it was a war, it's got to be the Gastelum fight, because that's one of the best fights of all time. And that's, you know, where we had that moment where Adesanya going into the fifth round was like, I'm prepared to die. That was a sick moment. Still an underrated fight to this day. Even though people talk about it as one of the best fights ever, that's still underrated. And I'll add the Brunson fight as well, which was another insanely impressive Matrix level of striking moment where he's stuffing the takedowns against Brunson. Remember, Brunson was calling him skinny going into that fight, saying he was weak, he has no wrestling, and Adesanya effortlessly stuffed the takedowns, knees him in the face, question mark kicks him, and then drops him with a hook. Adesanya has had some really iconic performances, but, you know, the rematch with Pereira against all the odds, lost the first fight in the UFC, lost both fights in kickboxing, even though some people say the first one was a bit of a robbery. That was an amazing performance from Adesanya, so that's got to be up there as well. Conor McGregor, Eddie Alvarez. I think it's the Eddie Alvarez fight, honestly. I think that's it, because that's when he became the double champ. That's really when his popularity skyrocketed. And this was even after the Nate Diaz fights, when he was already kind of known everywhere. This was right before the Mayweather fight. This is what propelled him into the Mayweather fight. He was looking like he was unstoppable. His striking was too high level for everyone else. Goes out there, trash talking against Alvarez, hands behind his back taunting him, and just dropping him all over the deck like a fish. An absolute masterclass, absolute schooling. So I think that's his most iconic performance. The Aldo fight, number two. Some people are going to say that's number one, but again, I just think the Alvarez fight was the perfect. I just think he's going to walk him into the left hand and play him like a fiddle, right? I think he's going to spin his little spidery web. That was like McGreggor's walk him into the left, play him like a fiddle kind of performance. Nate Diaz rematch. After the loss to Nate Diaz, he goes out there and has an absolute war. The narrative going into that was McGregor, he can't be the nail, even though he had a tough early outing against Chad Mendes. People were saying he can't be the nail. He's not got the gas tank. He's going to gas out so easily. McGregor goes 5 rounds, beats Nate Diaz. Absolute war. One of the best fights of all time. And then an honorable mention, the Khabib fight, which could be number one. Even though he lost that fight, even though he, for the majority of the fight, was getting dominated, that was the biggest fight in UFC history. So, like, it could be number one, but I'm going to have that as an honorable mention. Khabib. Let's get on to Khabib. The McGregor fight, number one. Biggest fight in UFC history. Won the majority of it. Submitted McGregor as well. That's obvious. Number two, the Justin Gaethje fight. His father passed away in the build-up to that one. You know, he retired as well. So there was a lot going on with the Khabib-Justin Gaethje fight. And he just went out there and submitted Justin Gaethje with ease. The performance itself is extremely impressive. Walking down Justin Gaethje, running at him, no respect whatsoever, like beckoning him on. Classic Marauder moment. Again, just going out there, relying on his chin, disrespectfully walking down a guy as dangerous as Justin Gaethje. Number three, it's the Michael Johnson fight. That's right before he fought Barboza, and then he fought for the title. But this was the one where Khabib really broke into the mainstream and showcased the true X factor, where he's talking to Michael Johnson on the ground, telling him, you have to give up, you have to give up. That's my number three most iconic Khabib fight. And then the honorable mention is the Dustin Poirier fight. The Dustin one was, in my opinion, that was his best ever performance. That was the most dominant, and it could even be his best win, because I think Poirier has the best resume out of anyone Khabib's beat. And again, it was smooth sailing for him, and he got the finish. But I don't know, it wasn't as Khabib-like as the McGregor fight, the Gaethje fight, where you see Khabib just marching him down on the feet, throwing flying knees, or the Michael Johnson fight where he's talking to his opponent, right? But that's an honorable mention. Jiri Prochazka, I think the Dominic Reyes fight is the most Jiri Prochazka-esque fight ever. This was like a Jiri Prochazka fight where from the moment the fight starts, he's switched on. And he looks dangerous, he looks powerful, and he's just marching down Reyes. And Reyes is throwing his simple 1-2s, and Jiri's just fucking going after him with the kitchen sink. It's a war. Like, it's an absolutely chaotic fight. I remember going into this fight, when I was walking out for this one, going in there in the cage. No, I'm joking. But I remember in the build-up to this fight, I knew this was going to be insane, and it was as good as I expected. But to make things even better, to make things even more Jiri Prochazka-esque, he gets knocked out with like an up kick on the ground. And I always talk about how there's the holy ghost that's like the holy martial arts ghost that's willing Jiri Prochazka to victory. And he gets knocked out with this up kick. He's out for like 5 seconds and he comes back. And like 30 seconds later, Dominic Reyes is out snoozing on the canvas. This is the best Jiri performance ever. Number 2, the Glover Teixeira fight, arguably the best fight ever. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Even though, you know, Jiri for a good chunk of that fight was the nail. He had his moments. He gets the submission. The buzzer beater last minute submission against a guy who's as good on the ground as Glover Teixeira, which was insane. Again, this could be the best fight of all time. And then the Khalil Roundtree fight, I think that makes the list. He started slow and then he stays in there. Down 2 rounds going into the 3rd round, even though his 2nd round was a little bit better. And Jiri is one of those guys that you can rely on being down 2 rounds in a 3-round fight and going after the finish no matter what. And Jiri Prochazka has this ultra instinct moment against Khalil Roundtree, where just walking him down like a madman and eventually flatlines him, face plants him. And then the honorable mention of the Volkanovski fight as well. But let's get on to Kamaru Usman. Usman's most iconic, legendary performances. Number 1, Masvidal in the rematch, knocking him out brutally after the first fight being a stinker. Masvidal saying that Usman couldn't stand with him. He can't do anything to him on the feet. Usman goes out there, outstrikes him, and sends him into the Shadow Realm, becoming the first ever fighter to be able to KO Jorge Masvidal. And then after this fight, he had the aura of invincibility. Number 2, Colby 1 fight, one of the greatest fights of all time, still underrated to this day. The second fight with Colby was good as well, but the first fight was even crazier. Usman has a close fight with Colby, although I think he was down 3 rounds to 1 and gets the finish in the 5th round. Insane build up to that fight. And then the fight itself exceeded our expectations again. Going into that, a lot of people were saying Usman and Colby were boring. And, you know, sometimes you get 2 wrestlers in the cage, they cancel out with the wrestling and they just stand and bang, and that's what we saw. And then number 3, I'm going to say the Gilbert Burns fight, where Usman had a pretty lackluster performance against Masvidal, and a lot of us were thinking that Burns was going to be too dangerous for him on the feet, and Usman wasn't that powerful, his striking wasn't that great. He goes to work with Trevor Whitman and shows up, and it looks like his striking has improved tenfold. Showcases one of the best jabs in the UFC, knocks out Gilbert Burns. That's up there too. And then also, honorable mention, the Tyron Woodley fight. That's also in the mix. I think that the Woodley fight, I can't say it's more iconic than the others because it wasn't as entertaining, but it was super dominant. And he was the underdog going into that. And to see him ragdoll someone like Tyron Woodley, who's known for being a good wrestler, who's known for being like a big welterweight who's super strong, to see Usman ragdoll him and like just make it look easy was insane. All right, let's get on to Poirier. Another fighter with some iconic fights. The McGregor rematch. That kind of encapsulates everything that makes a Dustin Poirier win, right? The underdog going into it. This was supposed to be the warm-up fight for McGregor before he fights Manny Pacquiao. Remember, there were talks for him to fight Manny, and this was supposed to be his warm-up fight because he schooled Donald Cerrone at welterweight and went into this thinking that he was about to have a nice, easy fight with Poirier, who just went to a war with Dan Hooker. And Poirier not only is the underdog, but has his classic, like, gritty kind of performance where he's in there and he's just tougher than you and he's breaking you on the feet and he's out-dogging you. And Poirier outboxed and outslicked McGregor in the boxing as well. Even took him down. Just showcased better MMA skills. McGregor looked good with the boxing. Poirier proved, I'm the better MMA fighter. And you can't leave MMA, go to boxing, and expect to be able to compete with someone like me, who's been only doing MMA. I think this was Poirier's most legendary performance again. First person ever to knock out Conor McGregor, to outstrike Conor McGregor. The Dan Hooker fight, I'm going to have that at number 2. That's one of the most intense fights I've ever seen. The Holloway rematch where Poirier wins the interim title, has a war with Max Holloway as well. That's also got to be in there. Seeing Poirier get the interim belt wrapped around him was pretty cool. And then the Gaethje first fight, having an all-out war with Gaethje. That could be number 2. I think the Gaethje first fight was really Poirier's breakout moment into being looked at as the insanely elite level fighter that he was. We knew he was good, but after he beat Justin Gaethje in the first fight, it was like, okay, this guy is like top 3 in the world at lightweight. Speaking of Justin Gaethje, I think the Ferguson fight is his most iconic performance. Taking it on short notice, it was supposed to be Ferguson versus Khabib, and Justin Gaethje, despite it being competitive early and getting dropped at the end of the second round, just takes it to Tony Ferguson and brutalizes him on the feet. 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, getting a late stoppage. And this was like the evolved Justin Gaethje, right? The Gaethje 2.0, patient Gaethje. That was the narrative after this fight. He looked like he had hit a new level from the guy we originally saw in like the Michael Johnson fight, which was my second most iconic Justin Gaethje fight, where he was doing the Rufus roll. He was doing the rolling thunder. He was just in there slugging for the fences. Maybe the most entertaining style you've ever seen, but this was like the same wild Justin Gaethje, but just a little bit more reserved, right? A little bit more reserved, and also showing that he's like world-class elite level, not just someone that could beat Donald Cerrone and James Vick. All right, the Chandler fight number 3, just an insanely good fight, one of the best fights ever. And then the Poirier rematch, that's my honorable mention. I just don't think that's top 3 just because it was a head kick, and that's a little bit too slick for Justin Gaethje. I want some Gaethje Rufus rolls and Rufus grunts. The head kick against Poirier was a little bit too slick. It's not super Justin Gaethje-esque, but that's obviously an honorable mention. A Justin Gaethje moment's like an uppercut from Justin Gaethje, or a big hook, or a rolling thunder, right? Let's get on to another lightweight. Ilia Topuria, the last 3 wins against all the GOATs. Ilia Topuria's most iconic performance, Charles Oliveira, up a weight class, International Fight Week, winning a second belt, and also it was like a first 2-minute KO, and a brutal one at that. Second one, the Volk fight, sleeping Volkanovski to get the title. I think most people were picking Volk to win that fight as well. He was kind of like the underdog going into it. We knew how dangerous he was, but there was this idea that Volk's still going to be too slick for him. He's got too much experience, and Topuria goes out there and flatlines him. And then the Holloway fight, being the first person to ever KO Max Holloway. That's number 3. Oliveira. The Gaethje fight is Oliveira's most iconic performance. And I've said this a lot for these other fighters, but that was really the performance that, outside of the Michael Chandler fight, which is my number 2 pick, where he won the belt, he was the underdog, and, a lot of us thought that Chandler was going to win. No one ever thought Oliveira was going to be champ, up until that fight was booked, of course. But like, Oliveira was like this underdog his whole career, and he wins the belt against Chandler. Beautiful moment. Has a comeback fight as well. But remember, the Gaethje fight, he got the belt stripped because he missed weight by like 0.2 pounds or a pound. And I remember like 10 fighters on the card missed weight. So there was something going on with the scales, something inaccurate. And apparently, and I don't know if this is 100% correct, but I remember Oliveira and his team maybe saying that they made weight backstage on the digital scales, but when they went and stepped on the, old school scales, that they were over a little bit. Either way, Oliveira gets stripped of the belt. A lot of people were talking about how's that going to affect him. He's angry now. He's going to go in there emotional. This is a horrible circumstance for him, and he fights like a bat out of hell. Classic Oliveira performance as well. Gets dropped a couple of times, comes back to win. Sends Justin Gaethje flying across the octagon in the first round as well, and then jumps on Justin Gaethje and subs him in 1. And when he got up to his feet and he started going like this, saying to wrap the belt around him, we were all saying that this guy could probably beat Khabib. Now, in hindsight, I don't know. Khabib would be a tough matchup, but still, he really looked like the best lightweight of all time after this win. He really did. And, just showcased everything from the power, Muay Thai, getting dropped, grit, getting back into the fight. Chandler fight number 2, and then the Poirier fight number 3. Honorable mention, the Gamrot fight, just because, it wasn't in as big of a spot. Fair enough. It was for a fight night main event as opposed to title fights, but still the Gamrot fight was such a masterclass. And he jumps into the crowd and has this really good turn back the clock moment where it's like, wow, this is vintage Oliveira. That's my honorable mention. Islam Makhachev. Speaking of Charles Oliveira, his most iconic performance is his win over Charles Oliveira, where going into that fight, even though it seemed like the fan base was split 50-50, those that were picking Oliveira, including myself, were so convinced that it was going to be an easy fight for Charles. Like, I knew Makhachev was good on the ground, but remember, before Makhachev fought for the title, he wasn't showing us his striking. He didn't strike against Bobby Green. He didn't strike against Dan Hooker. He just ran through them on the ground and finished them easily. And we were all saying, well, Oliveira is the best in the world on the ground. It's going to get nullified, and it's going to come down to the striking. And we were right. And I was right. But Makhachev schooled him on the feet. So that was the problem there. Makhachev showed up with the best defense ever, looking like he was impossible to hit, and just countered Oliveira at ease, made him pay on the feet. That's ultimately where he dominated the fight, drops Oliveira in the second round, jumps on him, submits him, submitting the Submission King in a massive card. I remember the build-up to that card was just insane. That was, aside from UFC 229, I think this is the second most hyped I've ever been for a fight card. And I think a lot of us watching will agree with that as well. So yeah, Oliveira fight, the Volk rematch. I'm not going to say the Volk 1 fight, even though that's an honorable mention. And again, I know he won the Volk 1 fight. I get that. But again, after that fight, even though he won, and initially I thought Volk won, but as I've watched it back, Makhachev won 4-1. He did win. It was very impressive. That's his best win ever. I don't think it was as iconic as the head kick KO over Volk, where even though I say that that's an overrated win, still head kicking Volkanovski and having this moment where he, does the shush moment, and he's walking away and he just knocked out the pound for pound #1 fighter in the first round. That's obviously an iconic moment for Islam Makhachev. And then the Dustin Poirier fight, I think, is even more iconic than the first Volk fight as well. Again, even though he beat Volk, and that's a really good win. Resume-wise, that's his best win. I think the Poirier fight, submitting Dustin Poirier after having a scrap, outboxing Poirier as well in moments, being very impressive. But also, again, there was something to be said about it being a bit of a scrappy fight, where there were moments where Poirier was doing really well and Makhachev was bleeding. And to see him fight through that, have a really insanely entertaining fight, and then get the submission in the 5th round nonetheless, I mean, I think that's his third most iconic fight ever as well. So let's get to Merab, the Umar fight. That is his most iconic fight ever. Even though it was close, the emoting, and there was a moment in the 3rd round where you see Merab flip the switch and you see Umar Nurmagomedov start to get tired, and you just knew this is going to be a classic Merab fight from here on out. And he's just taking down Umar at will. This was the loudest crowd I've ever heard in my life. Every single time Merab took down Umar Nurmagomedov, the crowd went absolutely ballistic. And the reason why is because he's doing it to Umar. He's doing it to a Nurmagomedov, which just reinforced how built different Merab was. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to out-wrestle even Henry Cejudo, who's a gold medalist, Olympic wrestler, which is already insane. But to do it to a guy who's known for being really well-rounded, really skilled, and doing it to a guy that was, like, on paper, a nightmare matchup. So yeah, to see Merab just, like, basically having a good time, not stressing in front of, like, a super high-level fighter like Umar was insane. Number 2, the Henry Cejudo fight, where he picks up Cejudo in the 2nd round and carries him across the octagon, has another alien-like performance. Number 3, the O'Malley rematch, submitting O'Malley, insane. And then honorable mention, the Yan fight. Even though, again, that was a much more dominant performance than the Umar Nurmagomedov fight. Like I said with Makhachev and his Volk 1 fight, the most impressive win is not necessarily the most iconic performance. Like, I think that the Yan 1 fight is maybe his best win, but it's not his most iconic win.